welcome to the Voyage Clinics Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. John Sanders, family physician. Our objective with the podcast is just to bring knowledge and understanding and happiness to our communities. Today is one of my favorite pickleball bros, Jason Peery. We've been pickle bros for a while, but also friends in the community. Jason's a neat guy. He's got a really cool history, and his depth and breadth of experiences in life, in coaching, in wellness, and just in helping people progress is profound. He's got a passion for it, as I do as well. And so I thought it would be fun for us to just talk shop on our podcast. Jason, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks. Hey, so give us a little bit about your bio. Just give us a little background information.
Yeah. Well, let's see where to begin. I'm really thankfully and happily married to just a wonderful woman, Lisa. We have 6 children, 2 grandchildren. How do you sum up my life?
You've done a lot of things.
No, I would say my passion is coaching, teaching. I've done a lot of business, but really that's, maybe that's what pays the bills. But really what I love doing is working with youth and young adults and families who particularly in the mental health space. And then with coaching, I've coached a lot of sports and love doing that. So it all kind of, they all kind of connect. But I would say that's where my passions are.
Cool. In our podcast today, we're going to cover some cool ground, some of my favorite spaces. One of them is coaching and helping people, coaching them up. Another one is going to be kind of mental health and some of that space. And then obviously the most important, which would be some pickleball and how that kind of checks all the boxes.
That's how we first decided or talked about, are you inviting me to do this podcast? We realized we have a bunch of common ground and we first met each other with pickleball. But then I think we realized that some of the things that are kind of close to home are the same. So
yeah, for sure. I want to talk briefly about, this is totally off script, by the way, but it's something that I've noticed in you and in some of the people that I've met throughout life. And it's like a winning personality. When you play a lot of pickleball or you just interact in life, even in business and pickleball and in board games, and you notice like this person wins a lot, like I play board games with my kids and my wife and stuff. And I win like almost all the time. and I've noticed some of the same, like, there's some weird characteristics of someone who wins, and I just wanted to see what your thoughts are. Like the winning personality or winning mindset. I don't know what that is, but can we put some words to that?
I think when it comes to winning, I think that it's probably not obsessing so much about the actual winning, but about the actual, like, the process and being willing to prepare. I think when I found pickleball, I found it to be like a great challenge because it looked a lot easier than it was. And I think with basketball coaching, it was the same. I just think that if you're willing to really prepare and think through and work hard, then you're in a position to win. And if you don't care so much about the winning that it defines you, then you're also more likely to win. Mm-hmm. I think if you're out there and you're willing to, if you're able to stay present, then I think you have you're much more likely to be able to finish off close games. You're much more likely to perform your best when your best is needed. If it's your whole world or your whole identity, then you don't end up winning that much. So no, I don't know. With board games, maybe it's different. But
no, yeah, putting that in perspective, staying present, and then also like putting it in perspective and keeping that perspective as you're out there. I sometimes you play free and sometimes you play too clenched in. And you lose because you're like overthinking or over worried about. Yeah. So it's like, if it's all, everything I'm very
mindful of that. We actually played against each other a fair amount, but not with each other, that much. When with my partners, I'm always talking about this, like, hey, two more points and they're going to be tight. 2 more points. If we're coming back or we're down or whatever, I'm always thinking about who's loose and who's tightening up. And I think that's definitely a part of winning. But I think that really overall that the willingness to prepare, the willingness to work hard, the willingness to really think about the game. We're talking about sports. I think, for example, in pickleball, I just get the sense that most people don't really think that much. They're out there hitting the ball, they're trying to win, but they're not really thinking about something really simple that might completely deconstruct the whole game. Once they realize there's a hole in the piñata, almost always that dude's backhand, we go to that guy's backhand and they're done. then you realize like, oh, it was that easy. We found one of the weaknesses and it was over. So I think, so I think when I coach basketball, and I think the same with pickleball, I think very strategically, and I think that
it's so true. Like there's so much deliberate intention behind every shot at a high level. Like you've played at the highest level in pickleball, and I notice when I play against any of the pros, like there's never a just hit it back shot. It's always with intention to a location, and looking at the next steps, finding the weak spots and exploiting those. Like those are all super, super important. I think of also like the winning is like this mental frequency. And I remember we did have a couple of times to play together, and I love your communication. I love the way that you present, like, hey man, just let's give them 1 point, that we got it in the bank. I remember you saying that. And so I just love that you're focused in that space. But more, I think there's a frequency of positivity, optimism, hope, never fear or despair, never. And I think that's neat. It's neat.
I think that's hugely important in any sport. I think it's so natural. What I love about sports, pickleball is the one we're immediately talking about, but in general, I think that sometimes I joke with people and I say, you could do therapy for $150 an hour, or you can play pickleball. And either way, you're going to learn how to manage your emotions. You have to, like you have to deal with your own mistakes. You got to deal with your partner's mistakes. You got to deal with whatever, clownish stuff might be going on the other side of the net. You got to deal with the referee. You might have to deal with a bad, with the wind or with the sun or with a bad call. There's any number of things where, people talk about mental toughness, but I think of it as emotional toughness. There's mental toughness to me, which is like thinking about the game in a way that helps you win. But there's emotional toughness, which is what I think a lot of people sort of mix up with mental toughness, which is the ability to get past the last point, to stay present, to stay positive, to stay relentlessly positive, and to help the people you're playing with feel like, hey, no matter how many mistakes that you make, I've still got your back, And that doesn't mean you never say anything. Doesn't mean you might not give them a reminder, but that goes with our own mistakes also. The ability to say, it's very easy to get narratives going and say, oh man, I'm playing terrible. I'm the worst one out here. My partner's never going to play with me again. Have I gotten bad? Am I a bad player? Is the other, what does this mean if we lose? All that stuff. Like, that it's a skill, just like in basketball, shooting or passing or dribbling, or with pickleball, third shot drops or drives or serves or whatever. The ability to stay present. I think that goes with probably, in anything in life, but with sports, I think the ability to stay present and positive is just, it's enormously impactful.
Relentlessly positive. Yeah. I'm going to quote you so much on that. That is so good. And I love what you said about the dialogues, because even in our day-to-day lives, I hear these, I have many, many clients, and some of them struggle with emotions, right? And it's often there's a dialogue behind that emotional state. You're worthless. You're never going to amount to anything, and all these things. And I think that speaks to the importance of allowing those dialogues in our minds and recognizing when they are influencing us emotionally, whether in a sport or anything, but also being careful as a coach, a parent, a loved one, with the way we speak to them. If we are putting that dialogue in their head, you're a worthless, I can't believe that you know what I mean? Like, and in pickleball, it's your partner, right? But in life, it's your companion, it's your child. And man, we can really affect them if we put those dialogues in their head and they believe it. So having the resilience if someone's, one of the things I played a lot of sports growing up, basketball and football and wrestling and rugby in college and volleyball and soccer. And I love sports. I just love them. And the emotional toughness that you have to have when someone's trash talking, and like you have to get over that, and you have to not allow you're a terrible dribbler. Like you ain't got no handles, kid. And like you have to deal with that.
Yeah, we found the weak guy. We found the weak spot.
Yeah, totally. And so then you have to resilience your way through that and not allow it to affect you. And I love what you said, like pickleball, or you could pay $150 for therapy, but I can't condone that as a doctor. But it's true that the lessons that you learn to overcome in any sport is so huge. And I love that you're doing, because you're physically doing something while overcoming obstacles.
Yeah.
And that's rad.
And by the way, I'm a huge advocate for therapy. In fact, every day, there's not a day that goes by where I'm not, encouraging someone to do therapy. So it's kind of a joke, sort of. But I do think that, sports, it's an amazing way to learn to become your best self, and to hone, how to manage your emotions, which is not easy to do, but it's darn good practice, Yeah. So
tell us about kind of your coaching experience and why you love coaching so much. Let's talk about sports and coaching. Yeah,
I think that I had an unbelievable high school basketball coach, and I also had some good and bad coaches before that. But my high school basketball coach was really impactful, and we had kind of a dream few years there, and so I really looked up to him. I found him so inspiring, and he pushed us, but he loved us, and he just helped us believe we could win. And we also had a lot of drama. There were deaths. His daughter died before the biggest game of the year one year. She had a stroke, and then she died a couple of days later. So he didn't even show up to the NorCal championship game, in Sacramento Kings Arena. He wasn't there. We didn't even know why. And we found out later his daughter had a stroke, and then she died. And then our principal, who we were really close to, got brain cancer. So, but then we had these amazing. And Cord Robbins, who's my pickleball partner, we were there. We were in high school together.
You were? I didn't know that.
We were.
Now that makes sense.
Yeah. So we've known each other going way back.
Were you guys playing ball together?
Yeah. We were on the same team.
No way.
And we were the
awesome.
backcourt of this team. So we went through all this stuff, and so he had just a huge impact on me, and it was him. So many years later, he was the one who asked me to come back to the school where I played and where he coached, to come coach. He had retired from coaching, and he had been principal there. And one of my teammates was the headmaster running the school, and both of those guys came to me and said, hey, would you come and coach this team? We haven't had any success for 15 years. Would you come back? And at the time, I had 6 kids between the ages of 2 and 13, and I was like, oh, this is impossible, But I said, well, let me think about it for a little bit. And a week later, I said, I need another week to think about it. And it took me about 3 of those before I finally decided to do it. And it was just, it was a wonderful experience. And it was just like some of the best of times. And I loved the relationship with the kids. I loved the idea of taking a program that was broken and trying to inspire the kids to care about one another. That when I got there, the kids, they didn't like each other, and even the parents didn't like each other. No one would come to the games, and it was like a ghost town, and it was just a miserable experience. And so to try to install a culture there where people not just said they cared, but genuinely cared about one another, was and to try to bring enthusiasm to the school, and to try to encourage. I remember the first meeting I had, I got on the loudspeaker and said, hey, anyone who's ever played basketball ever in your life, who's ever even thought about playing basketball, come to this room. And, we went from having a school where there were 9 total players between varsity and JV, where they shared players, to having, 12 on each team, and to having a program that ended up becoming, really successful, was just so fun,
Wow.
And
turning it around. How long did that take year-wise?
I think it turned around immediately in terms of the culture. I would say in terms of the winning, it was the next year that each year just got better and better, and so it didn't take long. And then people wanted to come to the program, and it was just such a beautiful time. It was also a great community thing, because then the school and its communities were showing up at the games, and our whole family was at the games, and the kids were at the house all the time. So my children got to be around the players, and it was just a really kind of a heyday.
Do you know what you did to change the culture and to really create that winning environment and build those connections? You mentioned, like, when you first got there, it was so fragmented, and there was a lot of like resentment. And
well, it's funny, you can talk about culture and whatnot and hope it just changes, but I think what comes to mind was a few games in, we played a team called Menlo. They were really good. They had a bunch of great athletes on this team. They were one of the best teams in the state, and we were actually winning by 14 with like 4 minutes to go, and we lost, And what happened was the players were all bickering at each other, So these, I always say, like, under pressure, your most deeply held habits rise to the surface, And that's what happened. And so you could talk all you want, but that game really provided an experiential, starting point to really begin to point to the things I was saying. It's like, listen, in this game, what do you think happened? What, and I think the kids were able to own the fact that they came apart at the seams, and so
you had like a meeting after the loss.
It was the next day, I think one thing with coaching, I think a lot of coaches that right after games, they sit there and they talk forever, and they their own emotions are spilling over on the kids.
Yeah.
And after any loss, to me it's really quick. It's something positive, and we the next day with calm minds. So I just remember the next day, because our next game was against an even tougher team who had just beat them. They had won 11 games in a row. It's a school that our school hadn't beaten in 14 years up to that point, and none of our players on the team in any sport had beaten them their whole high school careers. And so we talked about this, take blame, give credit. We talked about this thing. Hey, if you run down I remember where this meeting was in the gym, the whole thing, and to me it was the turning point of the program. But and I talked about, hey, let's say you throw a pass and that guy misses it. You're on a fast break and the guy misses the pass. If you get on the court and say, dude, what are you doing? You should have caught it. And the other guy says, what are you doing? You threw it too hard. You go back down the court and now you're detached. You're not emotionally. You're not together. You're not 5-on-5 or 6-on-5. There's no synergy. You're totally fragmented. That might last several possessions till you get it right. Till you fix it, if you ever do during the game. And my point was, could we not go the other way and say, dude, that's my bad. I threw it too hard. And the other guy said, it's my bad. I hit my hands. I should have caught it.
Yeah.
You go back down the court and you're totally different. And so to the kids' credit, they were so together. And the next game that we played against Sacred Heart Prep, the biggest game of these guys' careers, we beat them, and we beat them pretty handily. And it was a shock. No one anticipated it, but I think that was the beginning of what was a culture that not only I was talking about, but then the players insisted upon. There was no, if anyone, attitude or effort wise was ever out of line, the players, they just, they were all over it in terms of insisting that we treat each other in a way that was helpful and that was, the way that we'd want to be treated.
Yeah, so. I love that phrase, take blame, give credit. I think that's super smart. Like just the interaction there, how it brings an upswing instead of a downswing. It brings a togetherness instead of a enmity.
It allows you to reset, and allows your partner or your player, your teammates to reset emotionally. Because if
great
the
pass,
moment someone feels blame, they're thinking about it. Now the narrative is going, and now they're also afraid they might get taken out, or So anyway, we had good boys. They were good human beings, and they just needed someone to tell them that.
Totally. So good, man. So good. Would you say like some of the elements to coaching probably cross over into life and into families? I remember I had a similar, like my football coach in high school was just a huge influence in my life. I grew up in a home where it was a less good environment. My dad was an alcoholic and things. And so I had a lot of father figures in the community, and my dad was great too. He was awesome, but there was some definite dysfunction there. But man, my football coach was so impactful and influential in my life, and he was raising us up like boys, like his boys, and he was helping us become better people and better men and better future husbands. And it was impressive, his integrity and the way that, we work our butt off, right? Like practice and hell week and throwing up and all the things. But there was this like unconditional love, and always an upswing to his comments to us. He wasn't ridiculing or telling us that we're worthless. He was always hopeful of our abilities. And I don't know, do Do you find like some of the keys to success that you've seen in coaching? What are some of those keys?
Well, I think, just listening to your coach, I kind of got chills just listening to your description of him, because I just love those kind of coaches who are, I think that it's really hard. If you're an athletic director, I think it's really hard to find great high school coaches, because you think about it, they don't pay them hardly anything.
No.
You have to have someone who knows the game, who's good with kids, who can tune out the crazy parents, who's good tactically with the game, and who has the time and can afford to do it, because it's darn near a full-time job to do it at a high level, varsity level. It's, it takes all those things. And so how do you find, I think it's just hard to find those kind of people. So I think what happens a lot of times is that, you don't always have the best coaches. And I think the most common issue I see with coaches is that their emotions leak out onto their players. Right. So coaches make their players carry their own burdens. Yeah. They're worried about what they look like, how they are perceived. They're turning to the crowd and, or saying things or emoting in a way that makes it look like, oh, these idiots, dude, what have I taught you? What have I told? And I think they're so concerned about how they appear and look that it adds to their kids, to the burden that the kids are already feeling. They're already feeling pressure to perform for their coach, for their teammates, for their school, and now they got to carry your burden as well. Yeah. And now those words become even, the words that are said, they cut deep, and it's very easy. It's really dangerous. You think about, you have a kid in a program. If a coach is a real authoritarian and doesn't have control over his emotions, or is not really centered as a human being, then he could say anything. It's a dictatorship, Right. And so that is tough. A kid's completely completely in the most vulnerable spot. Mm-hmm. And so I think a coach really to be a great coach, he has to not just say he cares about the kids and loves the kids, but he actually has to actually care about the kids. Yeah. To me, that process of helping boys become men, that to me, that's the most exciting thing about coaching. It's the most beautiful thing. It's the thing that, like, win or loss, is the thing that moves me the most when I see someone, break through, maybe personal demons and become a great teammate, or a strong competitor, or someone that really cares about their team or cares about the game. They're a good sport. They're honest. Maybe they called the ball. Maybe the ball hit their foot and went out of bounds. And the referee gave it to the other team and said, "No, that was off me." And that's, showed integrity. So I think great coaches. You look at John Wooden, who's the greatest basketball coach that ever coached, and I think this is someone who really cared about the development of his players as human beings. So to me, I think that's number one. I think if your coach, the reason you were able to do Hell Week and these difficult things and you're throwing up, is you knew he cared about you, so he could push you. And players, actually, kids, sometimes we think that they, we want to maybe not push them too hard because we want them to like us. It's like, no, they will like and respect and love you the most if you bring out the best in them. So if you care enough about them to actually really challenge them and push them, they will respect you more. And that's much easier to do if you actually do care about them and they can feel that. If they can feel that your care for them and your loyalty to them as individuals and to the team, then they're going to do anything. You're going to get the best out of them. That coach got the best out of you. Yep. Maybe you didn't go to the NFL or whatever. You were the best player you could be. Yep. And you wouldn't have been absent someone who pushed you that hard and who cared about you that much.
So the emotional intelligence of the coaches really matters. And I'm kind of on this emotional intelligence thing. I think it's so important.
I think it's the number one thing. If you had to say one thing.
Yes.
I mean, you can say knowledge of the game, and that's really important, but if a coach is emotionally unaware and not attuned to his players, how's that team gonna succeed? Yeah. You're gonna have players who are depressed, who are anxious, who underperform every time.
I've got two interesting examples. This last year, both my kids are in high school, and one of them is playing lacrosse. She just graduated. She's a senior. She's a good player. She's been to camps. She's got good skills, and she's had a lot of turnover in the coaching space. And they just hired like a young coach that and emotional maturity may have been a little bit less than And she was doing some of the same things that you just described, with like spilling their emotions over onto the players, and it created a really, really challenging environment for my daughter as a player who's passionate about the game. But what was neat was that she had to overcome that. just like any other obstacle. Now I have to overcome a tough coach. And so she and I had some really good discussions about it. And I'm like, yeah, you have to be more mature than your coach. And that's hard. And so, but you can do it.
Yeah.
And so she got to that space where she was able to perform and let go of the spillover of the emotions onto her from her coach and from all the posturing, all the things. And it was rad for her growth. It was cool. She has a pretty good boundary there now.
Yeah, you talked about how, the things we say can really affect the people around us, but ultimately the responsibility still rests with us.
Yes.
And your daughter, amazing that she could have the resilience to take all of that in from a coach who wasn't that emotionally mature and not really up to that responsibility. And maybe she will be. And that's the thing about coaches. It helps you. It requires the best of you to be, to be your best. But
and I don't have any resentment towards her coach. Like I'm like, she's cool. She's growing just like we are, right? Just like you are.
Yeah, she was doing her best.
With what she had.
Mm-hmm. But for your daughter, that is really hard, and not every kid can do that.
Right.
It's really difficult.
One thing that she said was, if there's one beautiful thing about this coaching situation, it's that the players are more connected now because they've got this common thing that they're all figuring out, right? And so like the closeness of her team was really tight.
That happens.
It's really cool. Yeah.
I say, a unified team is the best kind of team, and sometimes it may be that they're unified against the coach, but.
I don't know that they're unified against.
No, and I don't mean that was but it's like, but they were struggling emotionally together, and they needed each other to get through it.
Totally. So. My other son was he's on like freshman, sophomore volleyball team for Maple Mountain High School. They just won state. Like they're incredible. Their program is phenomenal. We went to the meeting after the season. They had this, this like dinner and awards and all the things, award banquet, I think is what they called it. But we went there and several of the coaches spoke, and it was so awesome to see the emotional intelligence and resilience and perspective that those coaches had. They said, yeah, we won state. Like, yeah, big deal. What's most important is that each one of you guys are better people now today. Yeah. Like, I'm so proud of the progress you've individually made, and to see a couple of them get very emotional, like they're like crying because they're so there's something about the magic of the progress of people and helping them on that journey that is just wonderful, and it's powerful.
Beautiful. It's so beautiful. My wife says that she says, I think the thing that gets you most excited in life is just the climb, is that process of like, of trying to rise above, trying to climb, trying to inspire other people to do that. And that's beautiful to hear about those coaches. We had a season, I helped coach American Heritage this year, and we had an amazing year, but in the end we fell short of what we anticipated, and that was tough, because you, as a coach, you want to feel like at the end the players played as well as they possibly could, and that they accomplished as much as they could, and this team, didn't. But on the other hand, when we talked about it at the end, and also at the banquet, but also just privately as coaches, we were like, I'm so proud of this kid and that kid. Look what the demons this kid overcame, and look at the demons this kid overcame. Look how strong this one became, and look how much and at the end, like we ended up satisfied with the season because we felt like these kids had become way better people than they would have been, and that was what we always said was our goal, and in actuality, that's what we felt at the end, and you don't get to control at the very end. Only one team gets to say that they accomplished and succeeded and achieved what they thought they could, which is state. Everyone else got to lick their wounds, and that's part of the beauty of sports is, you sign up to climb the mountain, even though it's almost certain that you won't get to the top. Mm-hmm. You're going to get your face kicked in, and you might win state, or you might go all the way, but you get to make the climb, and that's a privilege in itself.
That's so cool, man. I didn't know you coached over there this year. Was that fun?
Yeah, it was a blast. It was so fun. My son was there. My youngest son was on the team.
Cool.
And so I got to coach these last 2 seasons there, and it was amazing.
Oh, cool. That's really cool. I think some of the challenges that our youth are facing right now are pretty unique, and I want to just pivot a little bit toward kind of the emotional journey of some of our youth and some of our and adults. Frankly, I'm in that thickness as well, and there are unique challenges right now societally sociology, it's an interesting time to be a social scientist. There's just some forces at play in our society right now that are really, really difficult and challenging to overcome. So on top of overcoming the sport, the challenge, all the things, I think there's some real obstacles there. I want to talk about those a little bit and from your perspective and what you see out there. And then let's pivot to kind of emotional, mental wellness and in that space a little bit.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a crazy world since the iPhone came aboard, I think 2006. I mean, we now have hard data, anxiety, depression, eating disorders, suicidal ideation. All of these are year over year higher than they were. I mean, we're going on almost 20 years now of increasing rates of those things.
An increase in just a few years of 50 to 150% increase in just a few years from the time we put smartphones in every kid's hands.
It's brutal. And you're right. I think it's easy to say, oh, these kids, these kids in the phones, adults are just the same, and we have to be disciplined, and we have to be examples of what we want to see from our kids as well. And, but yeah, they're up against a whole lot. I mean, and the social media pressures that are wrought upon the kids is huge. And you've got pornography out there. You've got huge FOMO, societal, pressure over looks, over wealth, over status, over position, over fame, being influencers. I mean, all of these things. I just don't think people have ever been so worried about how they're perceived. So
totally.
So much of life is performative, as opposed to just someone having the self-satisfaction of doing their best and doing well and being on a track that they're happy with. Instead, you see the same things and you see them a lot more. You're a doctor, but I do see them in my own family as well. We've got 6 kids and we've had some excruciating challenges. And they're not all, you have, things related to the phone, but there's also just genetic. I don't know what it is, but I just feel like there are more mental health challenges than there ever been. And, we have a son who, just kind of being very open here, and he's in the hospital right now as we speak, and this is his 5th hospitalization in 6 weeks.
Oh man.
And he's been on the verge of life and death, this whole time. And it's been 9 years of him dealing with really serious stuff, which at first we thought, is this depression? But then, as it turns out, it's, schizophrenia and bipolar, which they call schizoaffective. But they're, these are really heavy. I think most people at some time or another deal with depression or anxiety or, something close to those. And we have to learn cognitively how to process our thoughts so that because our thoughts are the seedlings for these emotions that can cause us so much trouble. But, sometimes they're more serious, much more serious. And they're all serious. They're all difficult. They're all excruciating. But, for this child, it's been something that's had him in and out of hospitals and therapeutic programs for almost a decade. It's so hard. It's so tough, man. And so I think that's really the reason I likely am not going to coach next year. I also got offered a great gig to coach next year at a high school, and turned it down because I've got a family and I've got a couple kids with some real struggles, and we've got so much, so many beautiful things going on in our family. But I think the reality is that we've got some really tough challenges too, and so this space here, having been in it for 9 years, it's kind of interesting. There's, when all the kids are little, you're like, man, things are going great. Everything's perfect. Our family's perfect. And then they get older and something really, really, maybe genetic or difficult hits. And all of a sudden you realize like, wow, man, I don't know what I'm doing here. I've got to figure this out. And it's not as easy to just read this book or just go to therapy once a week or whatever.
Gosh, I'm sorry to hear about your son. That's super hard. The learning and the growth that has come from that experience. Can you share with how you've kind of coped with that? I have clients who have children in that same boat, and they love them. They're trying to help them. what has given you kind of hope, and what have you done to kind of navigate or are navigating this space? Because you're right there.
Yeah, this could be a really long answer, but I'll try to keep it short. I think that I would say the first big lesson I learned with Tyler was that the most important thing was that I needed to be steady. I needed to be strong. It doesn't mean I couldn't be vulnerable or emotional or whatever, but I remember when he was first going through all this, and I would be like crying and saying, "Oh, I would do anything for you. I would die for you. I would, And I remember him saying, "Hey, Dad, what I need from you is just to be steady, man. Because I'm carrying my own thing, and now I got to carry yours. I got to worry whether you're okay." I realized, that's true. Like what our kids need to see is someone who's healthy and who's strong and who's going to be unflappable in terms of like I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to quit. I'm not going to quit on life or quit on you or whatever. I'm going to be strong, and I'm going to be steady, and someone that you can talk to, and someone that's going to be here. And my, my dad used to always say, you're only as happy as your least happy child. And I just don't think that's while it came from a good place and he's the greatest dad, ever, but I don't think that's a good mantra to have, to say, I'm only as happy as my least happy child. So if you're not happy, then I'm not happy. Right. Now you're responsible for that. And, so, and what I realized is just that, so many families are struggling. I don't think there's a family that doesn't have an excruciating challenge or two, excruciating, difficult, brutal. And so, yeah, I think a good part of my last 9-10 years and what I'm doing more and more now, and my wife as well, is just talking to other families who are saying, where do I begin? How do I start? How do I help this, this kid that I love so much and who's such a good person, but they're struggling so gravely. Like, how do I help them? And so that's really where, my heart's at a lot. And why I've tried to clear out a lot of things in my life to be able to be helpful and to try to, invest in things and be involved in opportunities to try to help families,
Cool. That's really cool. That the connection and the growth that comes from our families is profound. And sometimes it's very, very, difficult, difficult. Helping some of my kids navigate some of these waters, maybe not as intense, but definitely some very, very difficult space. I've learned some of those same lessons and how, as a doc, I think I see mental illness, I see the depression, anxiety, and sometimes I see true, really, really hard mental states like the schizoaffective or schizophrenias. Bipolars are really tricky sometimes, and you're thinking, you can't think your way through this. You can't cognitive behavioral therapy your brain to kind of think differently and feel differently. Like, this is beyond that, and that's hard. I think that's hard when you feel like, man, is there any hope here? What can I kind of do? That can be really tough.
I think that's one of the biggest lessons I learned. I think we talk about cognitive behavioral therapy, which is so great for anxiety and depression. Yeah. But the reality is that I think I always thought that if I just work hard enough, if I'm creative enough, if I love him enough, I'll figure this out. I'll figure out a solution here. I'm going to find a way. And I realized that's not the case. You don't get to control everything. You know what I mean? I have good friends to this day who are like, okay, what's the next step? We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And I got a 5-point plan. And we're going to no, you don't understand, bro. That might work for one thing, doesn't work for everything. And really, you need to be in the space where you're strong and you show up and you love, and yes, you're trying everything you can. But when the kid feels that you are so anxious about fixing them, it doesn't help them. No. It makes them feel broken, makes them feel like your love might be conditional, makes them feel like a project, makes them feel like you don't have confidence. And so it's such a tricky thing because you think, well, of course, I'm going to try everything. I'm going to do everything. But some things only God's grace is going to handle, and there's some things that you have to leave in his hands, in my opinion. And I just don't, my perspective has shifted a lot. And this is one area where coaching, say basketball or pickleball, whatever, where, you can think strategically and figure out just about every possibility in order to prepare someone to do their best. But and even with little kids, it's different than parenting older kids.
Yeah.
With little kids, you can actually create fun almost every single day. You can create, a fun activity, a competition. You can go out somewhere. You can do all these things. You can have movie night. You can like engineer almost fun every day and really make it a magical life. And that's amazing. That's commendable. And that's a reflection of parents who are willing to put in hard work in that way. But when they become teenagers, I think that those skills that work for you sometimes work against you, where you can't control everything. And if kids feel that you're trying to control them or the experience, like they flinch, they back away, they create even more space. And so I think that the willingness to not try to control everything, to be steady and loving, and to understand that that's a separate person from you. They're not the same person as you. You can't even, I think a lot of us take pride, like that kid is a reflection of me, when they do great, that makes me look good. When they do bad, that makes me look bad. So I've got to make sure that they are doing well, or that's some reflection of me. That means I'm a good parent. And in my opinion, that's all got to be set aside, and that's something that I've had to learn, where I valued so much. Am I a good parent? Am I a good dad? Like that's my identity,
Mm-hmm. It's my job to fix this.
It's my job to fix it. And and who am I if not a good dad, type of thing.
I'm trying to be a good dad.
Yeah. And when that's the case, then you're not always honest, because good dad isn't always the popular dad.
Right.
And that's why I think that even when we say, I know it sounds kind of radical, but like even to say like, I've got to be a good dad, good husband, any of that stuff is like, if you're trying to be good dad, good husband, you're not going to always be honest. You might stay quiet when you should be honest and be, and you end up carrying resentment as opposed to just being honest about how you're feeling or whatever. Or sometimes a kid needs you to be a little more firm. That doesn't mean mean, but it means they need to hear the truth sometimes, or they need you to be strong, and you might just be soft, and we can go along with what they say. And they may say, "Oh, Dad, let me just do this thing. Can I get $50 to do this thing? And can you just let me have Snapchat on my phone? For your 13-year-old daughter made that mistake." And so you want to be the good dad, so you say yes to things you should say no to, or sometimes you're maybe too tough when you should really just be super loving.
Totally.
And so I think that good person, good human being, is the person that that can strike that balance. And I think that it's just learning how to not be controlling and to not be that person whose ego is tied to how their kid is doing, I think actually facilitates the kid being able to be their best, because they're not feeling this, this sort of manipulative undertow,
It's similar to a good coach who doesn't allow their emotions to spill over on their child, or expectations, and they're just present, steady. They're willing to connect. One thing that I've noticed in raising a bunch of teenagers, and you're right, the equation changes, and the evolution of our brains as parents is so beautiful. And I see it a lot because I deal with a lot of families. We evolve from like, oh, this is an infant, I have to care for everything about this child, to a toddler. Now I get to, do all these things, but still provide a fair amount of structure. And then as they get into adolescence, like that letting go process is really, really challenging for every parent.
Yeah.
And to be able to say, I'm going to let you wander and make mistakes and bump your knees and not overly hover or overly worry or overly be involved, like just the right amount. And sometimes it's more steady, sometimes it's more loose, and sometimes it's something in between. And figuring that out is such a beautiful neuroplastic experience.
Well, I think that's beautiful. And I think we all struggle with my youngest kid is heading to college in 4 days, and so this process of, letting go and of having that balance. I think there's a therapist named Brad Reedy. I don't know if you know that name. He wrote a book called Journey of the Heroic Parent. He also wrote another book called, I think, The Audacity of Courage or something. And he had a wilderness program that our son went to, actually. And he said something that I love. He says healthy attachment is healthy detachment, you know?
Yeah.
And we hear about codependency and enmeshment and all these things. And you know, ultimately this, you know, where we kind of try to fuse the identity of the kid with us, or even an adult relationship where, you know, whatever they say, we take personally, or if they're, you know, everything becomes a reflection of us one way or the other. And so he says, you know, healthy detachment is healthy attachment. In other words, the acknowledgement that we are separate people. Even if you are my spouse or my son or my daughter, I'm not you and you're not me. And to respect that person as a human being, to try to provide the best teaching and example that you can, but without coercion and manipulation and control. And that doesn't mean you're not clear, that you don't have boundaries, that you don't have things that you enforce in your household as a condition for living in the home. But I think that acknowledgement that we're separate people, we're not the same one. And I think that when those get conflated, where the line between where I stop and you begin, when that's blurry, I think that relationships can become a mess. That's really good.
I see a ton of adolescent kiddos in my practice at Voyage Clinics, and it's so cute. They're so cute. I love them. But they all have the same posture, the same body language, they're all kind of like closed off. They're like, they don't want to interact much. And mom's like telling me everything about this kid or dad. And the kid's just like, oh, give it a rest already. Right. Yeah. And there's this thing that happens in the teenage years. And I think it's because we as parents haven't evolved, like you said, like we're still we haven't had a healthy detachment from that kid. So we're overly unhealthily attached, enmeshed, whatever you want to call it. But it can be really, really hard. How do you, what's a great way to kind of get through to your teenager, or maybe help them overcome some of that being closed offness and kind of overcoming that?
Man, boy, I'm thinking of all my kids and kind of different phases of this. And it's really interesting that with other people's kids, teenagers, man, I'm loose.
It's so easy.
You know, just talk to them, connect with them, easy, get them talking.
They love me. We love them.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
And so the question is, you know, why is it that with our own kids, you know, if we're struggling with a kid, why is that? You know, and usually with someone else where we're playing loose, we don't have a whole lot to lose, you know, so we can just be, it's kind of like they say, like grandparents, really easy. You can just do the fun stuff and not the hard stuff. But, you know, parents, I just think we naturally get caught up in the same kind of thing we were just talking about. You know, we have fear, and the fear that they're going to make a mistake, or the fear that they're going to make us look bad, or they're going to make themselves look bad, or they're going to take the wrong turn in the road. I think that kind of fear causes. It's just like in a game. If you're in a basketball game and you're afraid at the free throw line, you're going to brick those free throws. You know, if you're afraid in a pickleball match, you're going to grip that paddle too tight and you're going to pop it up. Or you're gonna hit into the net, and so I don't think it's any different in parenting, man. Yeah. You know, we're all susceptible to it, but I think the awareness of that, you know, with a kid, if we can try to, you know, understand that they are a separate person, and just talk to them whenever I'm struggling communicating with one of my own kids, I try to pretend just for a second it's someone else's kid, and usually the questions just then come, hey, what are you doing? What do you think is going to happen this weekend with the Pacers and the Thunder? Or hey, so how are you feeling about school? Like, are you stoked, or what's, you know, like, so I try to just for a second just think, if this were someone else's kids, I would strike just the right tone, and it would help the kid kind of open up. Now it's hard because we can't also control that, you know. We can't just say, you know, if I do this set of techniques, they will open up and they will be there. But the kids who come in your office, their parents are right there. So now they're feeling that dynamic of the doctor. They're feeling the dynamic of their parent. Totally. The parent's hovering. They're trying to, like, you know, say what makes everyone happy. And of course they're slouched in their chair because this is a burden, right? Yeah. You know, but I think that the kid also has to be in a mindset of you know, being willing to talk. And I think a lot of times kids, when they don't talk, a lot of times it's they may feel some shame, and it could be from the parent, the expectations of the parent, which can be so heavy. You know, we talk about control and all these things. They also feel the weight of expectations of, you know, the parent. You know, maybe they feel that sometimes the love could be conditional. And also, if let's say a kid makes mistakes, if you're in a religious household, we talk about choices and repentance and restitution and making things right. And if we don't talk about those things and help kids understand that, like, listen, your worth, it never changes. I love you no different no matter what, man. And I think if kids don't have that message, they can also really shrink into a really scary place if they feel like that they've made mistakes, which all kids do.
Yeah.
That they made mistakes that may result in my parents not loving me, or them thinking less of me, or them turning their back on me, or loving me less than the other kid, or whatever. So I think we can't be afraid to teach. When I talk about healthy detachment versus attachment doesn't mean you just like go your way and do your thing.
Right.
In fact, a detached parent is actually very, very present and is willing to, have any conversation. It's not trying to avoid. Sometimes you can say, oh, well, healthy detachment means like I don't have to have hard conversations. Like, no, it's the opposite. You actually, if you're honest with yourself, you're having really honest conversations. And I think that once a kid feels that they're honored as a separate person, then you actually have attachment. You have, that healthy detachment provides a healthy relationship, healthy attachment.
I think what you've described is so poignant. It is unconditional love. And if they feel that, if we're all guilty of parenting from a position of fear, of anger. Yeah. Anger is really roll it back. If you peel that back, there's fear beneath that.
That's what Yoda says. Fear and anger.
Yeah.
They're right.
Yoda knows.
Yeah.
And so I've noticed in my journey with my teenagers is being vulnerable with them and going back and repairing and saying, look, I got overly hot about that situation. Let me tell you why. I was afraid that this, and this, and that's not healthy thinking. And I apologize, and I'm imperfect, and I'm sorry. And so, and then I kind of repair it, and then try to figure out the antidote to fear is love, and how can I show them that unconditional love and give them space to really feel that and really be present with them and connect with them. And
that's beautiful.
It's super hard to, I think, consistently stay in that space because we digress to 8th graders like all the time. Like sometimes in our parenting, I'm just like, wow, why am I behaving like an 8th grader right now? Like,
I think that's a really important thing, to connect fear, love, and anger. They're, if I am angry or if I am really irritated, my wife is amazing. She's so centered and she'll say, like, what are you most afraid of? Like there's something that you're afraid of.
Yeah,
Peery.
I see that you're upset.
And at first I might be like, what are you talking about? The kid is being an idiot,
Yeah.
But then it's like, I'm just afraid that he shouldn't be dating this girl, man. And this is going to be bad for him and whatever. And so there's usually something behind it. And I think that kind of awareness, I think one of the great things about therapy, and like a good therapist will push you to know yourself,
Yeah.
And to understand what is it, that is causing you. Whenever I'm really, and by the way, every parenting thing I'm talking about here, I'm not some expert. I've made a mistake on every single one. But whenever what I'm trying to do, and what I think tried to learn over the years is just to try to be more aware. Yeah, if I'm afraid, or if I'm angry, or if I'm like retracting, or if I'm in fetal position over something, or if I'm sick to my stomach, like, what is it? What is it behind that? Because you can try to escape one way or the other, or try to avoid, but to be really curious and also to validate, to be really, to love yourself enough to be honest, to say, yeah, you're feeling really afraid about this thing, or you dealt with this before with another kid and it was really rough, and so yeah, naturally you're afraid. But that fear turns into a tortured way of parenting or expressing ourselves. So I think being aware of any negative emotion, of what are the thoughts behind it, is so important.
That is the emotional intelligence journey of a father. Like, we have to figure that out, and being willing to have the neuroplasticity, the flexibility of mind to change and to grow and to be different and to recognize maybe this is not the way. Maybe this anger, double downing on my anger is not the way.
Or to not feel like you have to have this perfect front for your kids. Like, I've got to show, I can't admit I'm wrong, or I can't, I would say, my oldest daughter was a difficult teenager, and and I love her to death. So if she watches this or when, she knows I love her to death, but she'll also acknowledge that she was tough sometimes. But if she would say, like, you got issues, I'd be like, no, you've got issues. You did this and this, you know what I mean? It's easy to go like, no, it's not me, it's you, da, 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 da. But now I don't even go there, If someone says like, do you got issues? I just say, oh, you have no idea, bro.
Yeah, so many.
You're darn right.
So many.
There's no doubt about that, So anyway, so what are we doing? I'm not trying to put up some front that I'm perfect or that I got, it's like, if they say something, I was like, yeah, you're probably right,
The power of that vulnerability and for kids to see that in their parents is so, so good. I think it's something that we go through in our personal development, and like, I don't know, sometime in junior high or something, like you get comfortable being uncomfortable and being kind of dorky and being kind of vulnerable and a nerd or whatever. My son just shaved his head and like, he's like super dorky and he loves it. And he's
comfortable in the skin.
Really cool with that vulnerability. There's really cool development. And similarly, I think it gives his friend space to be vulnerable, his friend space to be imperfect, because he has this really dorky haircut and everybody's rubbing his head and laughing. And it just creates that vulnerability. Similarly, as parents, I think as fathers, especially, if we just be vulnerable with our kids and show them how mortal we are, how imperfect we are. And
it's okay. Even if, like, let's say you have a rule, it doesn't mean you give in and you do whatever they want. In fact, that's an opportunity. Like if they, let's say you have a rule that, hey, the phone needs to be out by 10 p.m. in the kitchen charging. It is not in your room or whatever. And you have a kid that says, that's insane. That's absolutely crazy. And it's okay to say like, yeah, it might be. Yeah. Instead of saying, no, do you know the stats? And remember last time, and remember this, and then last time you didn't do. It's okay to just say, it might be crazy, but that's what we do here. That's the rule, and that's okay. It's okay if they think you're crazy, and they'll ultimately love you and respect you just for being honest and for being steady and for caring about them enough to protect them.
Jason, thank you so much for your time today and for going over such beautiful ground with me. I think it's beautiful from the sports and the passion of coaching and progress and helping people kind of raising up everybody around us, overcoming some of the emotional intelligence hurdles that as a coach and as a player, but then also as a father and as a husband and as a human. And thanks for getting real with us and sharing some of your personal things. I appreciate that, man.
Oh, well, thanks so much. Appreciate you having me, and thanks for being such a great guy. Your patients are lucky to have you as a doctor. That's what I think we need for all of our kids growing up. So
I'm just average, just like everybody else, just like a normal guy with lots of flaws. Thank you. I hope our listeners learned some cool stuff today. Like and subscribe, obviously, and keep playing pickleball because it is the answer.